Let me tell you something right now. The world just witnessed a shift that nobody can brush under the rug. For years, people have been watching this relationship between the United States and India, calling it a partnership, calling it strategic, calling it the future of global stability. But then out of nowhere, one bold Indian move, just one, sent the whole thing crashing down, shattering what everybody thought was solid. And I need you to understand something about this moment. This ain't about politics as usual. This ain't about diplomatic tea parties where everybody smiles for the cameras. No, this is about power, respect, and the realization that India ain't playing on anybody else's terms anymore. Now let's rewind for a second. For decades, the United States has been walking around like the referee of the world, pointing fingers, setting rules, deciding who's in, who's out, who's allowed to grow, who's supposed to stay in line. They thought they could extend the same script to India. Sure, they gave India handshakes. They talked about friendship. They gave speeches about shared values, democracy, trade, all that. But behind the curtains, you know what they wanted? Control, influence, leverage. They thought India would be another piece on the chessboard they could move whenever it suited them. But here's the truth that America didn't want to face. India ain't nobody's pawn. India's a player with its own board, its own pieces, and now its own game. And when India made that one bold move, when India decided to put its own interests above Washington's approval, that's when the cracks started showing. See, America's whole foreign policy depends on one thing, keeping everybody else just one step below them. But India flipped that script. India said, hold up, we're not bending to your rules anymore because we've built our own strength, we've built our own economy, we've built our own alliances. And if you don't like it, too bad. That right there, that was the breaking point. Because when you've been used to calling the shots, when you've been used to people asking for your blessing, nothing rattles you more than someone telling you, we don't need your blessing no more. See, that bold move wasn't just a decision on paper. It was a statement, a declaration, a roar to the entire planet that India is now a global force on its own terms. And let me break it down to you, America doesn't get nervous about small players. America doesn't lose sleep over countries that depend on them for aid, for defense, for recognition. But America does get nervous when somebody rises strong enough to say, we'll trade with who we want. We'll defend ourselves without you. We'll choose alliances that suit us, not you. And if that shatters our so-called friendship, then so be it. That's exactly what India did. That's exactly why this relationship is in pieces right now. Think about the timing too. This didn't happen in the 90s when India was still finding its economic legs. This didn't happen in the early 2000s when India was just beginning to be noticed as a rising tech power. This happened now at a time when India's economy is one of the fastest growing in the world, when its military has become one of the most advanced, when its population has surpassed China's, and when its influence stretches from the Middle East to Southeast Asia. You think India is worried about who approves? No, India has options. India has leverage. India has become the very thing America didn't want too independent to control. But here's the twist. This isn't just about India and America. This move reshaped the whole global stage. Because other nations, they were watching closely. Europe was watching. Russia was watching. China was watching. Africa, Latin America, the Middle East. They were all paying attention. And when they saw India step out and make a bold choice against America's wishes, they saw something that gave them courage, proof that the so-called unshakable grip of U.S. power could actually be shaken. Proof that America's influence ain't eternal. Proof that another nation could say no and still stand tall. And that's why I'm telling you, this wasn't just a foreign policy decision. This was a psychological earthquake, because the United States prides itself on being the one nobody dares to cross. But India didn't just cross them. India redefined the path altogether. And once you've seen someone break free, once you've seen someone succeed without permission, suddenly other countries start asking themselves, wait a minute, why are we still waiting on America's approval? Why are we still bowing to sanctions, to pressure, to lectures? Now let's talk about why India was able to do this, because it ain't by accident. This moment was decades in the making. India invested in itself, its tech industry, its space program, its military capabilities, its diplomacy, its trade networks. India played the long game while other nations were distracted. India looked at history and learned something America forgot. True power comes when you can stand on your own 2 feet. And now, when the time came, India was ready to make that one bold move. Ready to say, we don't just participate in the global order. You will now have to adapt to us. Let me give you an example. Imagine a kid in school who everybody picked on, ignored, or underestimated. Over the years, that kid hits the gym, studies hard, builds skills, and suddenly becomes the smartest, strongest, most respected person in the room. The same bullies who used to laugh at him now realize they can't mess with him. That's India right now. America might have thought they could forever dictate the pace, but when India flexed, the classroom changed, and nobody's laughing now. See, America has this problem. They think loyalty is permanent. They think once you've shaken their hand, you'll never go back on it. But loyalty only lasts as long as respect is mutual. And the truth is, for too long, America expected loyalty without giving full respect. They wanted India on their side, but they didn't want India to be equal. They wanted partnership, but only if America still had the upper hand. India's bold move shattered that illusion. India said, if we can't be equals, we'll go our own way. And let me tell you, this shook America deeper than people realize. Because America has lost allies before, but usually smaller ones. Countries they could replace or pressure into coming back. But losing India, that's not replaceable. That's not a scratch on the car. That's the engine falling out. Because India represents one of the biggest markets in the world, one of the strongest militaries, one of the fastest growing economies, one of the most important strategic locations on the map. You can't just swap that out. You can't just say, oh, well, we'll find someone else. There is no one else like India. That's why this move wasn't just bold. It was devastating for U.S. influence. It told the whole world, you don't need America's permission to succeed. It told the whole world, you can rise without following Washington's rules. And once that idea spreads, it's like wildfire. It's contagious. Suddenly, America isn't the center of the conversation anymore. Suddenly, the new question is, what does India want? Who does India support? What rules does India believe in? And let me tell you, when you get to that point, you've not only shattered a relationship, you've shattered an entire global mindset. Now I know some people might say, well, this is dangerous. Won't this hurt India too? Won't this cost India something? And listen, every bold move comes with risk. Every bold move means you're going to pay a price. But here's the thing. India calculated that price and said, we can handle it. Because they know something very important. Fear of losing relationships keeps you small, but courage to walk away makes you unstoppable. India was willing to walk away from America's approval because India believes in its own strength. That right there, that's how you know they're ready to lead. And don't get it twisted. This isn't about hating America. This isn't about tearing down bridges. This is about India finally saying, we're not afraid of your reaction anymore. And the moment someone stops fearing you, You lose control over them. America can threaten sanctions. They can throw political tantrums. They can send warning letters. But when India looks back and says, do what you want, we'll be fine, that's the ultimate power shift. What's even more powerful is how this move reshaped the identity of India itself. Because for so long, India was seen as a country of potential, a country on the rise, a country becoming something. But with this one move, India isn't becoming anymore. India has arrived. India isn't asking for a seat at the table anymore. India is building its own table and saying, if you want to eat with us, you come here. That's not just bold, that's historic. Think about the people in India watching this unfold. The youth, the entrepreneurs, the scientists, the soldiers. They see their country standing tall, not bending to anyone, not begging for validation. That does something to a nation's spirit. That builds pride, unity, confidence. That sends a message to every citizen. We are not small anymore. We are not waiting for the world to recognize us. We have recognized ourselves. And when a nation believes in itself like that, there's nothing more powerful. And here's the bottom line. America can't undo what just happened. Once a relationship shatters like that, you can glue it back together, but it will never look the same. The trust is broken. The illusion of control is gone. The balance has shifted forever. America may still be powerful, but they've lost something they can't get back. The ability to treat India like a junior partner. That's over. That's done. India made sure of that. So now the world has to adjust. Leaders have to adjust. Alliances have to adjust. Because the truth is, one bold Indian move just redrew the global map. And whether people like it or not, whether America likes it or not, whether anyone is ready or not, India is no longer just part of the story. It is the story. And that's the kind of shift you can't ignore, you can't control, and you sure can't stop. The shattering of this relationship wasn't the end of India's rise. It was the beginning of India's new chapter, the chapter where the world doesn't dictate to India, but India dictates to the world. The real shift wasn't in the deals signed, the speeches given, or the photo ops taken. The real shift came the moment India stopped asking to be included and started rewriting the rules of inclusion itself. For years, people looked at India as this rising power, this emerging market, this future leader, but always in the context of someone else's table. America's table, Europe's table, the G7 table, the UN table, the global trade table. India was the guest, sometimes honored, sometimes tolerated, but still a guest. And when you're a guest, you don't get to decide the menu. You don't get to arrange the seats. You don't get to set the agenda. But something powerful happened. India decided it was done being the guest. It built its own table. And then it said to the world, if you want to sit, you come here. That right there was the game changer. That's the kind of move that doesn't just shake relationships. It rewrites history. Because let's be real, asking for inclusion has never been the path to real power. Think about it. When you're asking to be included, you're already saying someone else is in charge of the room. Someone else holds the authority to invite you or exclude you. That means your very presence depends on their approval. But when India stopped asking, when it stopped waiting for validation, that's when everything flipped. Inclusion became something India didn't seek. It became something India defined. And that's a subtle shift with massive consequences. Because once you define the rules, you don't need to be included anymore. People need you. Nations need you. Economies need you. Look around the world. The G7 kept acting like they were the most important economic club on the planet. But when India built alliances through BRICS, through SEO, through its own trade deals with nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, suddenly those Western clubs looked outdated. Suddenly, the so-called global consensus didn't mean much without India's voice. And let me tell you, when your voice becomes that necessary, you no longer ask to be included. You sit back, you watch the world come knocking at your door, asking to be part of what you've created. And that is exactly what shattered the old balance with America. America wasn't used to anyone rewriting the script. For decades, it's been the director of the global movie, handing out roles, deciding who plays what. But India wasn't auditioning anymore. India started producing its own movie, writing its own script, funding its own production, and casting itself as the lead. The U.S. couldn't handle that. Because when someone else starts telling the story, the audience stops listening to you. That's what's happening right now. The global audience is shifting and the narrator is changing. Now, let's break this down even deeper. Inclusion is a form of control. It sounds nice, it sounds polite, but it's really about who gets to decide who belongs. America and the West love being the gatekeepers. They love making countries feel grateful for being let in. But when India walked away from that dynamic, it shattered the gate itself. What does a gatekeeper do when the fence is gone? Nothing. They lose their role. And that's what America is struggling with right now. The fact that India is not waiting at the gate anymore because it built its own house with its own gates and invited others inside. And here's the real kicker: India didn't just stop asking to be included. It changed the very definition of what inclusion means. Because inclusion in the American sense meant following Western values, Western systems, Western approvals. But inclusion in the Indian sense means diversity of voices, respect for sovereignty, equality of nations, partnerships instead of hierarchies. And let me tell you, when smaller countries saw that, they were inspired. Because for so long, they had been treated as junior members of the global order, too small to matter, too dependent to resist. But now, with India showing another model, they started realizing, wait, we don't need to keep begging for a seat at their table either. We can sit at India's, we can sit at one we build ourselves. That's how revolutions in global order begin, not with a war, not with a treaty, but with a mindset shift. Think about the psychology of it. For decades, nations have been conditioned to think approval from America was the golden stamp of legitimacy. If America accepted you, the world accepted you. But when India started rejecting that entire framework, it broke the spell. It showed everyone that approval doesn't equal power. Independence equals power. And when people saw India stand tall without bending, they realized something America didn't want them to realize: you can thrive without permission. That truth is dangerous to an old superpower, because once it's out, you can't put it back in the bottle. Let's also talk about pride. Nations, like people, carry pride. For too long, India's pride was downplayed on the global stage. But the moment India said, "We won't ask anymore," that pride exploded into the open. And pride is contagious. When 1 billion people feel their country is not just part of the game, but is making the rules, that creates a wave of energy, of innovation, of ambition. That's why you see Indian companies rising globally, why you see Indian scientists breaking barriers, why you see Indian soldiers walking taller. Because the message is clear: we don't need your table, we'll set ours. And don't underestimate how unsettling this is for America. America built its dominance on being the organizer, the host, the one everybody depended on. If you wanted to rise, you had to rise through them. But when India bypassed that, when India showed there's another path, it weakened America's role as the center of gravity. That's not just a geopolitical loss. That's an identity crisis for them. Because if you're not the gatekeeper anymore, then what are you? And that's the question America is now asking itself, whether they admit it publicly or not. What makes this shift even more powerful is that it was not loud. India didn't declare war. India didn't threaten anybody. India simply stopped asking. And that silence was louder than any speech, because silence is strength when you don't beg for recognition, when you simply act in your own authority. The world saw that, and they understood India doesn't need validation anymore. That's what makes it unstoppable. And here's the deeper truth. When you stop asking to be included, you stop fearing exclusion. America's biggest weapon has always been the threat of exclusion. Sanctions, cutting off access, isolating nations. But how do you isolate a country that no longer measures itself by your circle? How do you exclude someone who already created their own circle? You can't. That weapon loses its edge. And that's why America is so unsettled. They can't punish India into submission anymore, because India doesn't depend on their table to survive. That's independence on a whole other level. Look at history. Every empire that dominated the world eventually faced a moment when someone stopped playing by their rules. The British Empire faced it when America itself rebelled. The Soviet Union faced it when countries refused to follow their ideology. And now America is facing it as India rewrites the rules of global inclusion. History always repeats itself, but the roles change. This time it's India flipping the script. But let's not romanticize this. India paid its dues to get here. Decades of slow, steady growth. Decades of investment in education, technology, defense, diplomacy. Decades of weathering pressure, of being underestimated, of being told not yet. India absorbed all of that, and instead of collapsing, it used it as fuel. And when the time came, it made the boldest move, not by asking louder, but by refusing to ask at all.